And we are live. Good late evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Bigfoot Odyssey's Late Show. I'm your host, Kerry Arnold. With me, as always, my awesome co-host, Mr. Bradley Hatcher. Welcome, sir. How are you doing?
Doing good, Kerry. How are you?
I was doing pretty good, but I got over it. Watching football. We have two fantastic guests tonight. These guys, these are who I consider the brain trust of the Bigfoot community, even though they probably wouldn't say that about themselves. Creator of Sasquatch Out of the Shadows, Mr. Alex Petikoff, and he has a podcast. You can find that at 8 o'clock Eastern on Mondays. I forgot to put Monday on there, Alex. Sorry. No, and if you'd like to be on Alex's show, if you're a researcher or you've had an experience, you can contact Alex at petikoffmedia.com. That's right there. And our other guest, he is creator of Okanagan Bigfoot. Did I say it right?
Yeah, I know. You have a hard time with it. Okanagan.
Bigfoot Okanagan.
Okanagan.
I give him a hard time.
Okanagan.
Bigfoot Okanagan. Mr. Leon Mohan. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for having us on, I guess.
I was so messed up. Because I'd been without internet. And I'd contacted Alex. I'd gone on, it was Monday a couple of weeks ago. I was in the chat. I was like, I got to get Alex back on the show. So I thought I had booked him the same time I had booked who we had. Who did we have last week? Last Sunday? Brad, what's the guy's name? Can't remember.
Yeah, I remember. I don't remember his name.
Oh,
Carter Bouchard.
Yes, Carter.
Yeah, we had Carter on. I was like, Alex, man, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's when you lost your internet. In the middle of the show.
Right in the middle of the show, and you finished up and did a fantastic job. I remember that. But I contacted Alex. I was like, man, I'm so sorry. I double booked, and I was like, I'm on the 20th, man.
Yeah, no, at first I thought I was like, oh boy, am I supposed to be on tonight? I totally must have slipped my mind. I've had that happen a few times. Not that I'm proud to say that, but then I was like, I checked my calendar. I'm like, I thought we said the 20th. So
we did.
Either way,
it was me.
No worries.
And we just got lucky and got Leon. He's just as busy as a one-armed man in a butt kicking contest.
Yeah. Well, if I told you what I was involved with right now, you guys would be going, we should talk about that. But I can't, unfortunately. But,
oh, come on.
It's crazy.
You can tell us.
Well, we're gonna try to run through a few topics tonight. What I think, Leon Thompson, I'm sorry. Good God.
What?
I'm so sorry.
You didn't call me a last name wrong or anything, but
I got
to make you feel better.
I've got a couple topics here. Our good friend Eric Holbritter, he did a little homework and sent me this. And this was numbers for 2019. Because 2020 is going to be, obviously, COVID's going to bring these down. But there's a marked percentage improvement on these numbers every year, 2 to 5%. This is for 2019. The logging industry made $25 billion. National parks made $40 billion. Camping and other outdoor recreation, $646 billion. Okay, now that's a total of $711 billion. But we've also found this. Customers spent $887 billion on outdoor recreation in 2019. Yeah, that's almost $1 trillion.
Big number.
Do you think, Alex, that special interest groups take the government out of it, aside from maybe the Department of the Interior, would have any interest in saying that there's not a monster out there in the woods?
The proof is in the pudding. I mean, anyone can look at those numbers and say, well, obviously it would be in their interest to not say that there's a monster out there. For those of us that are interested in, obviously, we either know or we're in a position where we think we know what's going on out there. But general population, we're talking probably more than 95% of people don't even think of Sasquatch as a serious topic. I mean, you have the people that will say, oh, Bigfoot, oh, it's there. And what's really interesting is I'll see it even now up here in the Northeast. You'll see Bigfoot being used, tourist gimmicks, in souvenirs and gift shops and that kind of stuff, where you wouldn't see that 10 years ago. So Bigfoot is a big pop cultural thing, but none of these people that are seeing this in the gift shop at the Mount Washington Observatory in New Hampshire are thinking, well, there's a Bigfoot down in these woods below us. It's just a kind of a neat thing, right? It's an outdoorsy thing. So yeah, like I said, the proof is in the pudding. Obviously, there's a lot of interest conspired there to especially logging, like you said. I mean, we have a lot of logging up here in northern New England and Maine, and I spend a lot of time in some of those areas. And if you talk to individual loggers, maybe they'll have a story or two. They might tell you, well, I had some weird stuff happen. A lot of our stories come from that time period, especially 200 years ago when there was a lot of logging going on. But obviously the CEOs are not going to be rushing to hold any press conferences about Sasquatch in their logging areas anytime soon. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, they won't even admit to panthers or mountain lions. They'll say, well, no, they're not in this area. And that's just about everywhere you go in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, Leon, let me ask you this. Considering the increase every year, it's about the same increase as far as national parks go. Since 411 came out, people didn't seem to bother them too much. Don't you think they should make that a consideration?
I'm not sure. The reason why is just like you said, if they don't tell you about cougars and stuff like that, and usually, it might be a little different up here in Canada, but if we've got a couple areas here because the grizzlies have been coming through and black bears getting rid of the hibernating stuff. So I even have a sow bear on my property with 4 cubs. So there's a one angle of it that I look at it, and so I don't know if there would be hiding Sasquatch. I don't know that information. I look at the numbers though, but I look at them a little opposite the way you guys do. If outdoors recreation is that much money and people like to make money, and the government doesn't seem to be able to control people who like to make money, if they could prove a Sasquatch exists, I think they make even more money out in the bush.
You think so?
We deal with grizzlies all the time. Leanne, who looks after the horses, she was just on top of a mountain. There's grizzlies there. They're freaky, they're scary, they're intimidating, they scare the bejesus out of you, but people want to still see them.
Yeah.
And I think what would it say if we saw Sasquatch or we proved Sasquatch to be real, I think what would happen is people would be afraid at first because that's probably a lot of the cultural imprint we had, be afraid of them. Like you were saying, using the word monster. I don't think they're a monster. I don't even know what they are really.
That's the boogeyman, Hoss.
And so I look at it as I think there'd be kind of a transition that would happen in the culture if it was proven to be true. And I think what would end up happening eventually, I think people would find it kind of neat. It goes back to the other part that you were suggesting though, Carrie, if they're humanoid. They're more human.
If they're humanoid, my goodness.
It's interesting if you think about it from that logging perspective. I think those could be the kind of organizations that would probably have some sort of pushback. Just using other examples, good one's the spotted owl in the Pacific Northwest, right? That destroyed a huge segment of the logging industry. So I can see why something closely related to human beings or that even looks remotely human might have a huge impact. I think you're absolutely right. If there was the idea that, Sasquatch exists in this state forest, you can bet you that state forest would have an increase of people getting out there, especially in this new normal world, which I hate saying, but this world that's kind of being pushed upon us of, you're not really going to be able to go out. And we've had just people flooding the mountains up here and coming from New York City and other places that these people were locked in for 6 months basically. And we're just finally let out. And we have people starting fires in the middle of trails, on hiking trails. People who have never stepped in the outdoors their entire lives are just flooding the mountains now because they don't have anywhere else to go on vacation. And I think if there was the idea of Sasquatch, you would definitely see, especially in this crazy new world we're in, a rush of people trying to get out there and see it. So I think you're absolutely right. But I do think with other industries, you would definitely see a pushback simply from the idea of, people would raise the idea of conservation or starting programs, more land. I think especially maybe here in the Northeast, Maine in particular has the largest swaths of land that are not owned by the federal government anywhere in the U.S. Majority of, we're talking thousands of acres that are owned by private companies who are exclusively do logging. Now they let people on there. You have to pay a fee in certain areas to use the land, but they're privately owned. So you can only imagine the government or somebody coming to these people and saying, well, you have to set this land aside for these purposes. I don't know how well they would take that. It would just turn into another contentious issue. It would definitely be an incredible thing, of course, as we all would agree, but
land management is a contentious issue.
Yeah.
Because, like most of the forests in BC, even though people come up here and they believe they're walking in old growth forest, it's not old growth forest. It's been logged out right out, The trees are really big and all that kind of stuff. There are specialty areas that have been protected and stuff. But I mean, I don't know. I don't have the total answer to the whole thing. I think the key part is that's why I harp on upping our game in regards to actually trying to find out if they are so that we can prove stuff that's real. The whole idea about who's that guy who does? He's usually on all the shows. He's the guy who does the gene tests to see whether or not it's a bear or whatever it happens to be. I think he's from New York.
Oh, Brian.
Yeah, that's him. And I some people kind of put a projection onto him that, well, he's just not interested in looking for the truth. No, I think it's just the garbage data we send him. It's the same thing.
Oh, I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah. Oh man, his name is slipping my mind.
Yeah, he's on almost every one of these shows for Bigfoot.
I don't think it's Brian Sykes. It's another.
It is. That's him. It was on the tip of my Brian Sykes. It was on the tip of my brain.
Is it Brian?
Yeah, that's it.
Where's the guy with he's got like the mohawk?
Well, he's got he's the guy with the mohawk.
That's oh man, I've met him before. I interviewed him. This is really embarrassing. I keep thinking Todd Standing in my mind, but obviously that's not the right one. Todd Disotell. It was a Todd, yeah.
Right.
Todd Disotell, yeah.
Todd Disotell, that's another, yeah.
He's a great guy. He's a real good scientist, but I mean, even I have an interview with him on my channel. I interviewed him at the International Cryptozoology Conference a few years ago. He says, Bigfooters have to step their game up because half the stuff he gets is garbage. And then people get angry saying, well, he's just a denier. Why are you into Bigfoot? He's like, I'm not really into it. I just kind of, get sent these samples or I'll be asked to do a show. And then it just turns out to be nothing that interesting. People get offended by that.
Well, and again, if you looked at Bigfoot Tony, that's what's happened with him. I mean, he has been sent so much stuff that's, it's not very clear. And I think we do have to kind of up our game in regards to what we're doing. I mean, not everyone online's doing that or are doing kind of what I do or whatever, but it's frustrating for people who are doing research. I just had a conversation with Thomas Steenberg just before we got online here for a while. And if I wouldn't have bumped into Thomas or got into this whole thing, I'd probably have gone nuts already. But, he always said, stick to the facts, don't deviate from the facts. And I think, and I'm not too sure why everyone's so afraid to find out what we're actually looking at as far as evidence goes. Like, I mean, don't you want to know what you're looking at?
Well, Leon, let me ask you this: if there was funding available, if there were grants available, do you think that the research will be taken a lot more seriously if there was some money involved in it?
Yeah, but I think the allocation of the money should be done in a very specific way, and that is again when Bigfoot or BFRO came out in a decade ago or whenever it showed up on
95.
Yeah, on YouTube here. The concept and idea was a good idea because at that point there was no central place to collect data. And the problem is time has moved on and so fast and rapidly online, especially with a whole bunch of people just flooding online stuff with Sasquatch information and channels and stuff like that. It's really hard to go sift through that data. And I think I was talking to Thomas today about and Carrie, with what you've been doing and what Danielle's been doing and Brent's been doing and a few of us behind the scenes for the last 2 years, which is trying to get a different kind of voice that's out there. But because we're outgunned before, we were outgunned by probably, 1,000 videos of unspecified evidence narration.
Just say junk. That's pretty much what it was.
Right, and that's right. But I mean, it's taken a while for us to even be able to talk like this and actually really talk about it, because I think the next generation is they're not buying any of this other stuff. It's like, how do you know? And
the anecdote has become important for awareness purposes because you can look at someone's face. You can tell. We talked about this earlier, that this could be a topic of discussion, is body language as it pertains to eyewitnesses. You put that video out there, that link, and I tried to watch some of it. And I mean, there's a lot of subtleties, there's a lot of nuances in that. I mean, when I talk to people, I talk to them on the phone. Alex, I'm sure you do the same thing. Yeah. When you're getting guests on the show, you're listening to them on the phone, I can hear emotion in. But see, I've got a problem My problem is I've seen one, so I know they exist. So it's hard for me. I have this tendency just to believe everybody, but still, I try to take that skeptical form. You can't look at someone's body language when they're on the phone, and you also have an issue like we had last night, Brad, with Scott Pace. On the phone, he gives a ton of detail, and what do people always say? There's no detail in it. It's just a bunch of BS. When they get on here and they're showing their face, it's nerves. So on the phone, he gives me all this detail. He gets nervous on here a little bit. He's not getting them. We're trying to drag it out of him. I mean, he's a great guy, salt of the earth kind of guy, but he was kind of hurrying through it, I think, and not giving a ton of detail. And it became an issue. So, I mean, that's you kind of teetering on the precipice there with guests and trying to figure out if they're, being honest with you and forthright. I don't think there's a guest I've talked to that I haven't want to bring on the show. But when I said monster, and I think that's a fair term to use, monster, because they do scare us, especially in the different regions. Brad, I want you to dive into this. Well, we tend to get reports of more aggressive behavior in the South than we do in the Pacific Northwest, Canada. And I could see why Leon doesn't want to call him a monster, because he's up there around all these passive tree hugging Sasquatch,
Wait.
We're down here with the monsters that want to jump out and scare.
And down here, they're stuck in a swamp and
they got to fight everything else, huh?
Yeah. Right. And besides humans wanting to build all around them, they have to fight a little bit more for their territory.
Yeah.
Whereas up where you are, Leon, I mean, it's all vacation, 24/7. It's all holiday, right?
No, I can take you to places. I can take you to places without any Sasquatches, and I guarantee you, after we're down there for about 2 weeks, you'll never want to go to that place again. You will not sleep a wink at all for those 14 days, and that's just dealing with bear, grizzly, and cougar. So in northern part of the
right? Yeah.
So I mean, the reason why, again, I don't like using the term monster is, I mean, it sets you up again. It's like as soon as you say I'm going to bush to look for a Sasquatch, well, I don't know what Sasquatch is other than it's a big hairy monster, and that's going to affect your capacity to look at things on an objective positioning, and your brain's already going to hijack you on that already. As soon as you're written, it's like, I'm going to go look for a ghost in a cemetery. Okay, don't tell me you're
on Halloween. Yeah.
Don't call it a demon then, right?
Right.
But that brings us back to this whole not having enough, not being able, most people not having the time to invest into really looking for this creature. Okay, there's several points here to make in it. Is you normally have the weekend warrior that has an interest, and then what do you see most times when they get out there? And they're not really looking for Bigfoot, but looking for evidence. They're looking for footprints and tree structures and whatever they can find. They say, okay, these creatures are around here. They hear the scream 50 yards away, and it's time to go.
Right.
That's got to go let the dog out.
Yeah, it's time to go. So if someone's going to have to pay someone really good just so they can live out there where a lot of them are. And the plan that I had to try to catch them, I don't think would work in a place like where you live, Leon, because I think they can get too far away from you. They can just stay far away and watch you from a distance. Down in places like Florida, if they want to see you, they got to get close. It's flat. There's no real hills, and they may just poke their face through the bushes, but they're still going to be close by. I think thermal would work there. And then you just find some guys that have the cojones to go in there after them, But why do you think it is, Alex? What do you think is the difference here? Is it just in the reporting? Do you think it's just happenstance, or do you think there's actually something to this behavioral difference?
I think there's definitely something going on there. But just to really quickly talk about the monster element, I think what's really interesting is somebody who's interested in history, and I like looking at a lot of these pre-internet reports and things that were reported on even before there was the moniker Bigfoot or even Sasquatch was well known. I mean, just recently this summer, I was in Arizona on the Mogollon Rim, where they have this Mogollon monster. Now, that story comes from Boy Scouts and people in the area who saw something strange, and they didn't know what to call it, and they just kind of called it the Mogollon Monster. Geographically, it made sense. We have an area in Massachusetts where it's called Monsterland, because in the 40s, people would see these hairy monsters. In New Hampshire, you have these logging stories of the wood devils. think it's really interesting. So maybe that does inform a little bit about how we think about it today. But those of us that really get into this, we realize they're not monsters. There's a lot of, fear mongering going on. And I think scary stories are great, and people like to hear scary stories. Nothing wrong with that. There are scary Sasquatch encounters for sure. I've heard ones, people getting rocks thrown at a screen in front of their face. I mean, by definition, doesn't matter if it's an angel throwing it at you, that's still going to be scary in the dark when you can't see anything, right? So with regards to the monster, but I think when you're saying about the regional differences, there seems to be, I mean, like we've talked about with the Southern reports being just so different than anything we really experience up here in the North. There aren't very many attacks. I mean, the most aggressive sort of stuff I know around here in the East Coast and into even Quebec, Canada, and these areas are rocks being thrown, the typical rock throwing stuff like you maybe would see in the Pacific Northwest or elsewhere. There are a couple of curious stories of cars either being lifted or picked up and dropped and that sort of thing. And everything is sort of intimidation, not like some of the stories you maybe hear out of Fouke, Arkansas, the Legend of Boggy Creek, the attacks or the Skunk Cave, that sort of stuff. There seems to be a little bit more of a just aggressive kind of thing going on there. I don't know what the reason for that would be aside from just regional adaptations. Like you said, flat terrain, everything wants to kill you down there. Up here, I mean, we have moose and stuff and bear, but we're not supposed to have mountain lions. We do. That's backed up by DNA evidence that's been denied by state officials here in the East. And that's what my last project was on, Lions of the East, which was all about that. So that's another story. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just wherever you go, you're going to find different adaptations, just like you have different species. The same species, like the mountain lion, can exist in all these different environments, but they'll obviously adapt based on that environment.
But are you talking that affects their behavior? Are you talking about that affects their appearance? Are you talking about that affects both of those?
I think it probably could be a combination. I mean, if you think about human beings, we're adapted to very different climates in different areas, right? If you live in a northern cold climate as compared to a Mediterranean climate, you have just different adaptations to those areas. I mean, and I can imagine dealing with the different animals that exist in there. Like if you're dealing with alligators and these sorts of things, that's different than moose, which can be pretty aggressive, but generally, I mean, I don't think they would want to really mess around with you unless you're really stepping on them. I mean, we get a lot of snowmobilers that get attacked and they're around here, but no alligators.
Well, I mean, that actually says something, because you look at, animals, the farther north you go, the larger they seem to get, the closer to the equator you get. Even human beings, before world travel became really prevalent, people were bigger. The farther north you get, smaller, the closer to the equator. So I think that may have something to do with it. But as far as behavior, what about encroachment? Especially in a place like Florida, which there's not a ton of land there. And a lot of land that is there is floodplain or Everglades, So, I mean, pushing them more into the interior, maybe.
I don't know whether that, like the part I was trying to move towards with Alex was, I don't know if what we're suggesting about environment shapes their behavior and their look compared to temperament. So what I mean by that is you can have any species of animal, dogs, for instance, everything from things about this big that yap a lot to a nice big dog that doesn't yap at all. They look totally bizarre and they totally are weird. But you'll run across the odd dog, the odd deer, the odd moose, the odd bear, the odd raccoon, the odd wolverine that has a temperament, a certain style of temperament, or the ghost lions in Africa. Right. They're like every other lion, but for some reason, those specific ones were a little more nutty job than the others seem to be. And I think that could fit in any species of any style of creature that you walk on the planet, including us, because we're animals as well. And so we have us nice calm people or fun people or kind of crazy people. And then we got the nut job people, the sociopaths and the psychopaths. So I just wanted to throw that kind of angle in there as well. Is I don't know whether or not these aggressive ones are aggressive all the time, with aggressive because there's a lack of food source, or there's something wrong with their head.
Well, you see that here in Texas with hogs.
Right, exactly.
10 years ago, you could shoot one and go walking in after it. You would still have your gun, your thumb right on safety, but Now, if you go, especially anything thick, you have to pull out a pistol, and they will sit and wait till you get up on them, and they'll try to knock you down so then they can cut you.
Yeah.
And you hear more and more stories in Texas about people getting either killed or, very injured by hogs.
Very dangerous.
Well, this odd animal, like you suggest, Leon, which is true, being an exception, but it seems to be the rule with Sasquatch that in the southern, just with what we hear from reports. Now, like I said, it could be happenstance. It could just be, hey, we're just getting a lot of aggressive reports out of the South. Who knows what it could be? There does appear to be a difference. Is it lack of space?
The other thing too, I would have to take in consideration is I buy what Brad's saying, but also human activity on an animal. If it's turned out that like right now, hunting season has started. We have deer usually here all the time. For some strange reason, they know to get out of here.
They do.
And then they show up the very day hunting season's over. Now, if you go in and you're shooting things all the time, especially hogs, or you're shooting any other, like if you're going in there, those animals are going to be primally responding to you, not temperamentally responding to you. That's a survival response they're going to have in an environment where they predicted now that when Brad's coming in there,
exactly,
we're going to try to take him out because he's taken way too many of our kin out with us from the last time he was in here. So that's one thing. Again, I don't know. I find that most animals now. I know I'm taking their more flesh and blood approach, but that's what the data shows me from where I'm at today.
Right.
And I can safely say I'm open-minded. If I seen, one come through a vortex, or one pull up in a sports car, or one play a saxophone, I will say, I saw a Sasquatch come to a portal to play a saxophone in a sports car. I will say that, But I mean, you guys are all kind of wired the way I'm wired a little bit. It's going to give me a bit more meat and potatoes on that bone before you start making that kind of comment.
Anecdotal evidence is like is all we have for that. And I think my contention would be when as it pertains to behavior and Sasquatch, I think people in the North are a lot more mild mannered. I think there's a lot of rednecks in the South that run around wild through the woods, and I think they're just reacting from us. And I think the encounter is just that, because as people, I don't believe we're emotionally equipped to handle seeing these creatures. Because they're just not in our part of our paradigm as a whole. Those of us that know and are, made aware and can look for certain signs when they go out in the woods. Most people around these areas don't. So I think once they encounter people, they're probably getting shot at down in the South a lot more often.
Right.
I think that to me, and now as far as looks, I don't think they vary that much. I think they vary everywhere you go. I think the ones in the South and the ones in the North are the same. That's just how I feel about it. You can have 9-footers and 8-footers, and people say, well, down here they're shorter and more stocky, and the evidence doesn't point toward that. I just hear a lot of experts claim those things.
Well,
I try to listen to those guys.
The difference in size between a British Columbian in the province of BC Sasquatch compared to an Alberta Sasquatch is about a foot. And the weird thing is the extra foot is for the Alberta Sasquatch, not the one that has such an easy source for food, which is the BC Sasquatch. And I used to live in Alberta before I moved here to BC, and it was minus 50 for 22 days. Now, I don't even know how the deer survive it without their ears, busting off in something like that kind of temperature. But it's weird how they have the height on Justin's side of the mountain compared to on my side of the mountain, where they're a foot shorter. The coastal squatches are a little more aggressive compared to the southern squatches here, where I am from. And then as you move up towards the Yukon has some, especially with the First Nations people, they don't like them. Anybody goes missing up there, especially if they're ladies, First Nations a lot of times will suggest, no, that's a Sasquatch doing that. That wasn't a bear that killed her. That was a Sasquatch that killed her. So Justin can get tuned into one of the guys up there that has kind of the inside scoops on those stories. But I mean, when I go into the bush, I've been stalked by a grizzly. I've almost been killed by a grizzly. So I mean, I know what that's like. Part of that is what you were saying earlier too, Carrie. Is like we have lost our rhythm to the bush. We're not part of nature anymore, but we live in nature. In other words, we take nature and put it around us. But as far as us being vulnerable in nature, just go spend one night out in the bush by yourself.
Oh yeah, it's
just try that. And like in here in our area, I always get a kick out of a lot of guys who are, they're filming with their cell phones because they have Wi-Fi. Thinking, I go up the mountain here, I got nothing, man. If I'm in trouble, I'm in trouble. So it really helps you kind of really understand how humbling we should be when we actually walk into the bush. And plus, it helps us slow down so we're not so loud, because we're just loud as can be when we walk through the bush a lot of times. So,
well, and you're bringing
nature
your technology.
is unforgiving.
What's that?
Sorry, Alex.
No, I was just going to say nature is definitely unforgiving. I mean, it's one of those things that it's not to be trifled with. And I think those of us that have been in situations where I've had a couple moments where my life has kind of flashed before my eyes, 10 miles into a mountain range and there's nobody around you, and my friend is waiting at the base of the mountain, just kind of hanging out because his legs are killing him. He can't make it up there. He's got a bad knee. Yeah. And I start slipping as I'm trying to get this peak that I'm trying to check off a list of mountains I've hiked, and I start slipping, and it's like you realize, well, this is it. I mean, if it happens, it's here. So I think those people that just haven't had those experiences, I mean, they go into these situations and you see these stories that are crazy. People get mauled in one of those drive-in zoos where they get outside to take a picture of a lion and 4 people get killed. I mean, that I have a hard time believing that kind of stuff, but it's true because people have been so removed from a natural environment. Like I said, I've seen people up here just hiking recently that I'm like, what are you doing out here? You have nothing of any sort of protective gear. What if it was to start snowing? Because it could right now, this early in the season. You just kind of tell people, what's the deal here? Because they just are not used to that environment at all, even just in the slightest. So it's just amazing as human civilization in general trends more towards urban areas, cities, that sort of stuff. There's less and less people in the rural areas. It just kind of goes to show that you put people out in the woods, like you said, just spend a night out in the bush. Terrifying. Most people wouldn't be able to do it. It's not fun, especially if you have something come snorting next to your tent or your lean-to, whatever you're in, probably a deer or something small. But I mean, in that moment, you're gripping your Bowie knife or whatever you may have for dear life and saying, just get out of here, go away.
I use the violin myself.
It's just
the beast.
It's humbling. It really is humbling more than anything. I mean, in my opinion, it's just nature is just supreme. It's just even just yesterday, I was hiking up in this area here, not far from where the Betty and Barney Hill abduction happened, the famous 1960s Franconia Notch, this beautiful mountain range. I went up to this little cliff area I'd never been to before. A couple times I started getting into a rock slide and these huge boulders started tumbling. I'm like, I need to slow down and get to a more secure area. And you just those kind of moments really humble you, but most people will never experience that kind of stuff or don't want to.
Yeah, but
there's less and less for sure.
Yeah.
On the flip side though, Alex, I'm pretty sure that you probably have really good sleep. So when you are in the forest for yourself.
I love it. The only thing that sucks is I try to stay awake when I'm hearing stuff, but it's just so hard. You're laying there in the dark and I'm just like, oh, this is so nice, but I want to hear this noise that's over here. Luckily, that's what the audio recorder is for.
Yeah. Because
when I'm not snoring, it'll get something, hopefully.
You could use that as to draw them in.
I mean, I had just a couple of weeks ago, it was end of August. I was camping in northern Maine with my brother. 6 a.m, he wakes me up. He's like, do you hear that? And there's just this, sounds like an elephant running through the woods. We're sleeping next to this riverbed, and I just stick my head out the tent. Big mama moose and her baby, she looks right at me, and they just start running. I mean, they ran right next to our tent. I would have been sleeping the whole time if my brother hadn't woken me up. I couldn't believe it. I'm glad I did hear it because it was a great thing to hear and see. But man, it was just funny. It's like you're just comfortable. There could be who knows what going on right outside your tent. You would have no idea.
Yeah.
Well, to go back to your earlier point, I always know opening weekend of deer season, I make more noise than I would care to, and I've been hunting my whole life. But it seems like, from end of February until the beginning of October, whatever that first week, I don't know if I'm excited, but I'm always, dropping stuff in the stand or dropping something out of the truck or slamming the door or, setting the alarm. That's my all-time favorite. And I usually attribute that to still being sober drunk. But, setting your alarm in the woods is always is my favorite all time. But
what is it? What is it that draws Sasquatch to certain people in the woods? 70% of BFRO sightings are roadside.
Yeah.
Now the other 30, you've got hunters that go off trail, and then campers. But it's not. I mean, if these creatures are in the woods, they're obviously probably there watching most everyone out there, I would assume. What is it that makes them interact with some and not others? What do you think? Leon?
Go for it.
Leon, what do you think there? What do you think is the difference?
I do think it's either a young one. It could be either juvenile or just a younger, or
an adult.
or an older one. I think they're curious. I just think that's what they are. I mean, the weird thing too is I've had animals that, especially, it's a little, you have to be cautious about this story, but so don't do this at home. You have cubs that kind of hang around. When I worked in forestry, they'd hang around. They're kind of curious about you, and it's just like your kids, right? They're kind of curious about what's that dog over there. So they start toddling their way over there. Meanwhile, you're over here. You don't want that dog to see you, or whatever it is. You tell the kid to get over here, and maybe that's some of the vocals. I don't know, but
that's a good straw man impression you have there. Really, I like that. Beyond that, we do have this. This is from Paranormal Rush Hour. This is Ryan Rush, and this guy would know. If you do anything in this subject, people send you their stories and they talk to you all the time. He's been doing this for a while. He says he's noticed through the years that they tend to act much more aggressively. Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, I would throw in there. They seem to be much bigger there, too, upwards of 14 feet. And these are just, we extrapolate these numbers all from reports. Either what you've read from the BFRO or other sites that are actually keeping this information, trying to put all the information out there, unlike the BFRO seems to be editing. Cherry picking what they want to put out on their site. But I get them all the time from these areas. We're doing our third show in Oklahoma coming up with Livewire, Mark Copeland. They're coming up to his house. Now, is it that they're coming to a lot of people's house and people are not noticing? Or are they just coming to these certain individual places? Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think something I was going to bring up earlier, just in terms of habituation, whatever you want to call it, if we're to accept the premise that sort of stuff is valid, and there's certainly, I think, some folks that have very credible stories out there of ongoing activity. Those are really the only reports that I can think of where there's anything that resembles a sort of long-term relationship with these sorts of things. I mean, if we're talking about Diane Fossey or Jane Goodall and that approach to primates of, the primates are aware you're there before you even know they're there. I mean, it took weeks just for them to reveal themselves to realize you're not a threat, sort of thing. With Diane Fossey's case, working with gorillas for decades in Africa. So I think if you look at those habituation sites, I mean, one that I've kind of stumbled in an area not too far from me in New Hampshire. I used to go there all the time in high school. There were stories that it was haunted because there was a drug dealer murder gone bad there, and they threw the guy's head in the pond. Very crazy story.
Wow.
We used to, go there in high school. I've been shooting in that area for a while. It's just like a little local shooting plinking pit. And then, I camped out there last August, and we had weird stuff going on. And my buddy and I are both into Sasquatch, and we're kind of like, I mean, there's no way. Obviously, we're into this stuff. It's just other animals. And we had an audio recorder out all night. We got real interesting knocks and stuff. And later on, I then found out some folks that I trust, researchers, had conducted an investigation in that area. And I've since met the homeowner that lives in that area. And he was the first house ever built in this rural area. Now there's, maybe half a dozen. And he's always had strange activity. He said, we used to get rocks thrown at the house, the screams, the smells. We never really connected it until years later, that sort of thing. So maybe people are areas that are supposedly haunted or areas that have this sort of activity. Maybe that's just Sasquatch activity that people are attributing to something else that's known, such as ghosts, that sort of stuff that's more widely accepted as a real phenomena than Sasquatch is in the general population. So maybe there's an element of that. I don't know, but I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's something about their behavior too that gets people to all of a sudden click in their mind that this isn't what I thought this was. I'm thinking about a family that I had contact me who the husband was a grizzly hunter or grizzly guide hunter. bear hunting guide, and they live on top of this mountain. They've been hunting that area for a long time, and for probably 40 years they've been going up there recreationally. And then they bought property up there, figured this is where we should retire, and they had a lot of strange or stuff happening around their property and stuff. And they kind of attributed it to deer or bear or anything like that. But then this really different stuff started showing up. Like he's got a couple of kill zones there that have bones from everything: black bear, moose, grizzly, coyote, all in one area. And the bones have been snapped, marrow taken out.
Wow.
And so there's always this little mini. And this is kind of what we're talking about when you're dealing with witnesses and trying to data collect from people. You're looking for the pieces of the information that doesn't quite fit in. He told me another particular story that I'll share with you guys offline on that whole thing if you remind me, because I'll probably forget by the time we're done being online. But he had another piece of evidence that he came across, and he didn't want to tell me that after 2 hours of talking until the very end, because he wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to be looked at as he was crazy.
Oh, I'll definitely remind you now.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a good story, but I don't have his permission to share that part of it.
Absolutely.
But
Okay. Fair
It's
enough.
important to respect our
Absolutely.
witnesses and people who tell us their stories. Absolutely.
yeah, for sure. So that's it. Go ahead.
Well, this is what we came across over the past 2 years. What comes to us a lot is the same story, especially when it comes to not necessarily habituation, but people noticing these creatures around their house. They're like, they've lived there for 20 years, 25 years. And in the last year or so, they're starting to get all of this activity. What I think is happening here, this is just what I think, I don't know anything at all other than they exist, is these people start to become aware. Maybe they get a glimpse of it, or maybe the perception of the creature is that they've been found out. They've been watching the whole time. They've been there active the entire time. Now they watch us so closely, our subtleties, our nuances, our notions, the way we behave. And if you start to even, I think subconsciously, you would look around maybe a little bit more, and maybe they're starting to notice, hey, I think these people know we're here. Here goes. It doesn't change the game. It's like game on, start slapping the house, start throwing rocks, put a camera up outside your house, just see what happens. Almost every single time. You probably won't get them to come in the yard in front of the camera, but we've heard it so many times. We put game cameras up and all this strange activity, howls and things getting thrown at the house. That's happened. So we've heard it so many times from place to place. Those are the people that we want to do shows with when we do our travel show, or we did it with the Gotros. We're doing it with Mark. We did it in Ohio, but it was the same thing. They didn't notice it until they noticed it. And then it was game on.
Yeah,
So
but those are the people you want to do your research on too. Because
Sure, absolutely.
if you have a trigger that's making them do that, this goes back to your comment about what if we had a grant. Honestly, if we had a grant with a good team, and they're doing that behavior, I'm pretty sure our guys could come up with a great strategy plan to find out if they're there.
I'll tell you what.
The reason for that is because they have a trigger. And if they're in that area, like this family that I was telling you about, this Grizzly family, I think I shared this with you, Carrie, but the reason why they reached out to me, and they didn't reach out to me on Bigfoot Okanagan, they reached out to me on a hunting channel. And they accidentally left Bigfoot Okanagan on my tag instead of my other name on the tag.
I remember this.
Yeah. And so and what it was the people who, of course, the couple who bought this property, well, they wanted to retire there. So they had, their kids were all adults and stuff. And their kids, though, were raised on this property with the parents who are now grandparents. And then all of a sudden, one weekend showed up, and they had two places on the property, their primary house, and then they had their old homestead where when their daughter showed up with her new husband, they let them stay in the old homestead so they could have some private time, and they took care of the kids, the grandkids. The next morning, the daughter and son-in-law came in. Now, they've been married for a while, but it's the first time he's been on the property. And they came in for breakfast, and they said, "What is going on your property?" And they said, but this is when they first were getting to an idea of thinking this might be a Sasquatch, and that's why they reached out to me. And so they didn't want to tell them. They didn't want to tell their daughter, well, I think he's got a Sasquatch on our property. Yeah, right. So that's what they did. They said, well, we think we got a Sasquatch on the property. They said, well, because the thing they kept hearing banging and logs thrown on the homestead and smacking up against the walls and stuff. And so the grandfather's concern was he was worried that the grandkids might be in some form of danger because of this activity. And I said, it doesn't sound to me like that. And he says, well, what makes you think that, Leon? And I said, well, you raised your kids here, right? And they go, yeah. And your daughter's been here before, right? As a grown-up, yeah. And your son has, yeah. And you have your grandkids, yeah. And they've been here with just your daughter, yeah. And I said, it's him. They don't know if he's part of the clan. They don't know who this new guy is. They're not too sure what's going on. Now, of course, this is speculation on my part, but up to that point, they've been there for a while. It's never showed any aggression. It seems to have liked to bring things and put it in their garden. That's got to do with food. You know,
that is interesting.
But, so that's kind of a neat concept and idea, and so if you had an area like that and they were coming around and you had the right team, this might be not for 10 or 20 years down the road until we get our act together online in regards to being able to connect up and having the resource and the right people to get into an area where we can actually grid it out and get it ready if something like this happens. So we're all lone rangers out here, and I think that's some of the problem with what's
sad as it is.
So.
That sounds very similar to what happened up in Tennessee with, I either want to say the Carters or the Greens. Janice Carter, or is it Janice Green?
Carter.
The one that
Carter.
Scott Carpenter went to.
Yeah.
The same deal. When the daughter was married and brought her husband home, activity really increased, even though everybody knew what was there, but it just came on more than normal quickly.
Yeah, well, she had asked the daughter, and said, well, how do you deal with him? And he said, I think it was his wife that said, you tell him to shut up. That's what you come out and tell him to shut up. And so the next night it started up and they came outside and said, shut up. And doesn't seem to be a problem now.
I understood.
Fascinating to be able to be on a property long term like that, if you had, or even for a couple of weeks, if that activity is going on. It'll give you a stepping stone anyway of how to negotiate if they show up next year the same time of the season. So
yeah,
I would just look. I tell people, they ask me these things, I say, look, just don't pay them any attention. I think if you don't pay them attention, then everything is going to be okay. I think once you turn your eye toward them, then that's when things actually, it just seems to be that way. It may not be, but that would be my advice to anyone that is not very accepting of what's actually going on.
right.
Is to just look away. You hear a tree knock, don't even look up. Just continue on with your day. But I've got a question for both of you. And once we get through this, we're going to start taking questions from the chat. So get your questions ready. Make sure you put those all in caps for me, please. And thank you. All right. I'll start with you, Leon. If you talk about a team, okay, let's say there was a grant rewarded to you for the study of this creature, and you were to put together a team, what would you look for? Who would you grab up to take with you?
I would definitely take people who are used to being in the bush and have the rhythm of the bush. That's kind of what we have right now. And that would be Nick Evans from Roskills Bushcraft, ex-British military. He used to be in the bush, jogs 20 kilometers, 20 miles, 50-pound pack on by himself through the bush, jogs 30 kilometers, 30 miles in the bush with a little survival pack this big. He knows the rhythm of the bush. He knows the natural feeling, instinctual feeling of what the rhythm of the forest should be. You need a couple of those guys, or at least 2 or 3 of those guys. You also need somebody who is good with technology. So you need an on-site tech guy that really understands tech, so they know that when the cameras go out, it might not be Sasquatch. It might be something that they forgot to do when they were at home. Also, that same person has to be somebody who can really edit and do a lot of that stuff, because that is draining on a lot of people for us who run just a small crew. Another thing is you need somebody who's not afraid to, if necessary, not necessarily towards a Sasquatch, but knows how to respond instinctually when there's trouble.
Yeah.
The nice thing about some of the guys we have an ex-fire chief. He's used to tragedy. He's used to high duress situations. Those are the kind of people you're looking for. Is anybody who has jobs, police officers can be like that as well. Because what they're used to doing is being in high intense situations where their whole body's reacting, but they've learned the capacity to be objective outside themselves, to calm or keep themselves focused on what they're supposed to be doing. And you need a person that's like that, because by the time the incident happens, you guys just, you know this too. I mean, you're driving down the road, you see a bear, you reach for your camera, the bear's in the bush. It's going to happen that fast. And so, couple of things like that. The tech guy also has to, and I think the more you can get a couple of different people in each of these zones, those cover certain areas. So the tech guy also covers the drones. These new cars, I don't know if you've been watching the advertisements for the new cars that have the 360-degree camera around their car.
Mm-hmm. My truck has that.
Great car to me. Let's take one of those vehicles out in the bush. Get some Sasquatch to attack us. If it's coming around to get us, go into the car. Comes to the car. Great. We got side shots, up shots, back shots, you name it. You know?
I've got that on my truck, actually.
Even behind the trailer shot.
Yeah.
So,
Five cameras on that thing.
so
Alex,
you
I'm sorry. I thought you were done. My bad. Keep going.
and just one other point too, what's also very, very important, again, because I know how dangerous the bush can be, you need somebody who knows first aid, or you need to know first aid and survival. You need somebody like that, because something can go really wrong that has absolutely nothing to do with the forest. It could do with your stupidity. And
Totally.
So I would stack the deck up with that. There's not many people out there. I would definitely take Justin, Nick, and a few other people that I know online.
Yeah, you didn't have to be specific. I was just wondering what kind of people you would want to take with you. And same question, Alex, and also where would you go?
Yeah, I that's a really good point about the medical stuff. I think a lot of people, those of us that are into heading out in the outdoors, even shooting sports, that kind of stuff, it's always important to carry like an IFAK at least on your person, because half the times, I mean, you could cut yourself out there, just be by yourself and have to deal with that situation. Know your basic first aid. That's like really important. I'd probably bring my brother along for that because he's an EMT. So that takes care of that, and he's kind of familiar with that. But I think in general, much of the same sorts of people who come from different backgrounds, but who have specific skill sets, me being more of a tech person, I could see how, that would be something to worry about on that side. I would much rather focus on that sort of stuff than, planning in cases of danger. Of course, it's good to have a little bit of familiarity with everything, but I would probably go somewhere where I'm more familiar. I'm more familiar with the forests that we have here in the Northeast and these sorts of terrains than I would be in a place like when I was in Mogollon, Arizona. It's still a patch of woods, but you have elk, you have different things that you're not used to dealing with. So I think sticking to an area. Exactly. I mean, it's cool. I love visiting different places, and British Columbia is huge on my list. I would love to get out there as, a lover of nature. But I think sticking to an area you're familiar with, I would probably bring somebody along from some of the few associates here in New England that I really trust. People like, to be specific, I guess, Jonathan Wilk and the Squatchachusetts team. I think they're probably one of the best research groups in the whole Northeast. They're on the beat. They get regular reports all the time in some areas where people wouldn't even think, Massachusetts, people think Boston. Well, there's a lot of woods out in Western Massachusetts, and there's a lot of activity. People like that, people who are onto the beat, kind of an area where where there's been sightings, maybe more than just the road crossing or more than just the one-off sighting. I mean, there are those incidents where, a famous story that happened in 1977 where a Sasquatch was seen 3 times in the town and it's never supposedly been seen since. Probably was just a passing through curious juvenile or something along those lines. But maybe an area where there seems to be a long history of reports. Are there reports here going back even to pre-Bigfoot days, when they were talking about monster stories, that sort of stuff, being able to be in this area? Another spot would probably be somewhere a property with some sort of activity, ongoing habituation. Obviously, I think what Leon mentioned was pretty interesting about the interactions beginning because somebody who's not part of the group they're used to. I think that's definitely a valid point. But yeah, I would say stick to an area you're familiar with. I know I would, but if I had to pick somewhere else, I would try to learn as much as I could, or just rely on people who are more familiar with those areas if I couldn't pick my own areas that I'm used to.
Well, I did this, and of course, we're still going to do this expedition. It's a little bit different charge than what we're talking about than any long-term study. This is 1 week, and the charge is just get some better evidence than what we have now. Try to catch one of these creatures moving on camera. I had very few researchers. I think we had 3 that were actual Bigfoot researchers, 2 that were just woodsmen that were very familiar with woods, with direction, careful. I didn't want anybody young that was too young going. People that have had some life experience and can control their emotions. What we were asking people to do is a heck of a sacrifice to make. A medic. We had a medic, and then myself and my team, filmmaker, documentarian, to keep up with everything, not just tech, but just to film the thing, because that's what you're going to need is someone filming, not just the evidence that you get. You're going to have to give the narrative because it's the digital age. A picture, an image, a video is just not going to be good enough. You're going to have, aside from the stuff that you document and that you can nail down as this is what they do, this is what we found out, how they eat, all this other good stuff, is the story that goes along with it. To me, that is just as important, is that you tell that just to get to know who these people are. It's a trust issue. It's especially with something this short term is what we plan to do. Is you got to get people to know who these people are, where they come from, their background, and they're not. And of course, these things will stand the test of time, but people have to know you're not just out there trying to pull the wool over their eyes. Excuse me. We do have. Here's one question right here from Hansi Adams. Have anyone ever heard of Bigfoot bear confrontations? I think I heard one on Dixie Cryptid one time. Anybody else?
I've seen the video of the bear fighting the Sasquatch, but I think that's a hoax.
Oh yeah, we saw that movie. That was a movie.
A kid's movie. I remember seeing that when I was a kid. It was like kid gets lost in the woods and Bigfoot saves him. That was funny.
Exactly right. Was that was
that's where the bear battle happened. Yeah.
Home Improvement kid was in that, wasn't he?
Yes, that's it.
Oh, Macaulay Culkin. Yeah.
No.
I know.
Not Home Alone. Home Improvement. Brian something.
Something Taylor.
One of those. Anyway. Yeah, one of those kids.
It wouldn't surprise me if they have bumped into each other. Black bear grizzly, cougar grizzly, cougar wolves, they all bump into each other periodically and the fighting commences. So
here's something that's interesting and disgusting at the same time. The beast will come when a lady is having their moon cycle. Are y'all aware of this? I'm not aware of anything solid. Honestly, I hear a lot of things from a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of claims get made. And I think even if someone was observing these creatures and for whatever reason they weren't filming it, I would always question that. Any long-term observation, even then, could you make it, if you found out something about this group you're watching, could you make it this ubiquitous, all-encompassing, they did this, therefore they all do this? I don't think we can do this with Sasquatch. Do you?
That story I was telling you about, that one part of BC, if I took you up there for 2 weeks, you would never go back in there. I was running a crew in Isolation Forest. It was a helicopter drop, so we had to fly in. Had a crew of 90 guys, or 90 people, including ladies. And we set up camp, all tent camp. And the first night we were there, a girl started her cycle, and within 45 minutes, there was a 500-pound black bear coming through her tent to kill her. And that happened every single day for 17 days. So there's something, not saying because she had a menstrual cycle and the Sasquatch was looking for a date. That's not what I'm saying. Something in the vulnerability of, and those bears up there were the weirdest bears. They wanted to eat human flesh or live things. Tons of stuff over on the helipad for the garbage out, everything from pork, steak, you name it, just based in there in the sun. Nope. We want to come into your helicopter as it flies off. We want to chase you down. We want to.
Wow.
It was the weirdest kind of environment for sure. Spooky.
I'll tell you what I do have. I do have a picture. If anybody wants to see it, you can email me at bigfootozzy@gmail.com. And it is a Sasquatch that was following a couple for 2 miles. And I got several pictures, but the best one I have is from about 70 yards away. And this thing is leaning out from around a tree. You can see the whole right side of the body, his arms out, his head. You can tell this creature is massive, 8 feet or better. But his member is hanging out there. And I just thought it was very telling if anybody was going to create a costume that big, and go through that. Besides, this just wasn't these kind of people. Who's going to put that on there? But it's clear this thing was after this guy's wife, because it had gotten close to her a couple of times. But I have this picture, and I'll send it to both of you guys, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So I didn't ask if she was cycling actually, but I think I might email him and find out for sure. To be continued. Strangeland. Here's Leon. How do you know the Sasquatch in Alberta are a foot shorter and more aggressive than those in British Columbia? 2 areas joined. Reports, right?
That's actually reversed. It's actually they're larger in Alberta than they are in BC. If you talk to Thomas Steenberg, if you talk Alberta Sasquatch, Keenan and those guys, those are definitely guys. Their team there, definitely I would take in the bush without hesitancy, because they are all used to being in the bush, and they're all younger than much older than this old man here talking to you. Yeah, that's been pretty well, I don't want to say documented, but it's documented enough. Established, thank you. Yeah, in regards to witness reports, they seem to be larger. There seems to be different heights here too between coastal Sasquatch encounters compared to here, and again northern parts of BC and the Yukon. So I don't know, and it's those larger ones. I will say this though, thanks for the question, by the way. Those larger reports for Sasquatches are usually in the Banff Rocky Mountain area. They're not usually on the plains. So if you're heading towards Saskatchewan and that area there, it's they don't seem to be that tall there. So I'm wondering now too, as time's moved forward, it seems like the height. I can't speak for you guys, but in the States, but the height seems to be shifting. It seems to be getting shorter.
You get a very broad range in Florida. You get a lot of 5-6 footers reported in Florida roadside, but you also get 8 footers, 9 foot. I mean, caveman looking, ape looking. They're just the divergence is. Yeah,
well, the size for anything above 8 feet, or even say 9's really pushing it for BC. There's not hardly any reports that I can think of. I can't even think of one right now where it's like 10 foot, 12 feet, 14 feet.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay. You're talking about something that's in the moment, and a lot of this is predicated upon fear, and you're feeling this feeling when you see this creature. Do you think they grow a little bit in the moment? People estimating those heights. You think, Leon, Alex, you think so?
Well, you guys always hear me talk about you have got to be cautious. You got three brains in your brain, and none of those 3 brains are attached to each other. So your primal part of your brain is activated 0.8 seconds before you're even making a decision and getting a thought in your head about what's actually happening. And then your emotional brain's already hijacking your system. So you're getting an adrenaline rush big time. It's like when you were a little kid, you used to live in a house and you thought, this house is really big. And then you go back as an adult and you realize, this is my room. Mom and Dad, you put me in a closet. When the brain, and especially when it has to do with besides pareidolia, of course, you guys know what that also about. You have this other thing called apophenia. And apophenia is where when you don't know what you're looking at, just like pareidolia, your brain loves patterns. So it goes to the database of your brain, because you're not your brain. And it goes through all that data to find some kind of structural visual shape that might apply to what you're looking at, because the brain does not like not knowing what it's looking at. But the problem is it also can project an image onto that. And then on top of that, with apophenia, it will also produce a narrative that looks like a Sasquatch. and it'll take it to the frontal cortex. So, and then all of a sudden you'll have that thought that hits your head in 0.08 seconds afterwards. So you really got to slow yourself down. And that's like we were talking about earlier about, do we want to find out what we're actually looking at? Because I mean, I seen a Sasquatch, and my event is not your normal style of event of when you see a Sasquatch, and who wants to share that story of seeing a young Sasquatch playing on the back of a moose in the middle of a lake? Yeah, that's believable. Yeah, sure it is. And the other drawback too is the brain works really funny when it comes to memory, and you have to be really cautious because every time you rethink of a memory, you plant onto that memory.
Right.
And it's we did studies here at the University of British Columbia where we took they took a whole class and convinced each person in the class that an event that happened to them when they were kids, and none of it was true. By the time the experiment was done, every single one of them thought the event actually happened to them. And it was just the way how the brain works. And then we had to go back in there and unravel that so it didn't stick in their memory. So, but it's not that people are trying to be dishonest. It's like you were saying earlier, Carrie, it's really about by using body language and a couple of other techniques to really help people help you hear what they're trying to process. I mean, how do you put a narrative on something you've never seen before?
Right.
Where's the data come for something you've never seen before? What comes from your life experience and what your brain has stored for data in it? And so they might not actually have the exact words, but you're looking to see whether or not they actually own what they're saying. That's the key part. And
what's the reason we're all sitting here right now on this particular show? Because I had no frame of reference for this. And that's what I think affected me so much over the years, that I actually became somebody else. I had to become somebody else that did not have that experience. That other guy had that experience. It was probably a very bad way of doing things, but perception is reality. It's not actuality. What really happened, you'd have to go back and watch from a distance to see what actually happened. What I remember happening is what I tell everybody happened, how I remember it happening. Could things have been different? Absolutely. But don't you think these things grow a little bit in the moment? Alex?
Yeah, I do think so. And I just to bring up another example, I mean, I've looked into other subjects, of course, lake monsters, that sort of stuff. Lake Champlain here in New England probably has, in my opinion, some of the most credible evidence for the existence of some sort of strange creature. But one thing that's often happens is a lot of times there's an exaggeration in the size. I mean, that has to do a little bit with water, because water can project and make things look bigger. You may see a cormorant and think that it's a larger snake-like creature sticking out of the water. Sure, that's with water. But I have heard a couple reports where there seems to be like the 10 to 12 foot range, which just seems so unbelievable, especially in a lot of these areas where there's not old growth. I mean, most of New England was logged at one point. There's a lot of forest now because it's bounced back, but we're not talking huge trees like would even be out in British Columbia and into the Pacific Northwest and these kinds of areas. So it is interesting. I don't think those are a majority of the reports, though. Most of them are typically in that 7 to 9 foot range, what you'd sort of expect if it's not juvenile sort of story. So yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting factor, human perception and what that plays in describing what you saw in the moment. I think also culturally how accepted it is or how talked about it is. I mean, I know in a place like British Columbia or Northern California, wherever, there is sort of a cultural significance to Sasquatch, right? At least there has been for a while, Bigfoot country, all this sort of stuff. It's very touristy. There's a lot of restaurants named after Bigfoot or Sasquatch in a lot of these areas. So maybe it's a little bit more culturally acceptable to tell your people that you're close to, well, I had this weird experience. I think I saw a Sasquatch. People out there.
Sorry, Alex. There's a bit of a difference too on how Canadians view it. So if you said, I saw a Sasquatch to somebody, say, they'd go, yeah, right, whatever. But behind that is, yeah, it might be possible. Whereas from Americans' perspective, I could be wrong. I'm not speaking for all Americans. It's more like, yeah, right, whatever. And
no, definitely. Yeah. And I think especially like I'm talking about even just comparing to the Pacific Northwest and the Washington, Oregon, these areas, Sasquatch and Bigfoot is like culturally very acceptable, right? Festivals, everything. Here in New England, there's definitely much more of a stigma to it. It's changing now. Like I said, you can go into gift shops and see local places that'll have Bigfoot, and it's just kind of a funky thing that they do now because it's so popular, I think nationally, internationally, Bigfoot. But even just talking to a lot of these people that had their sightings in the 70s and 80s, they said for the first 10, 20 years, they didn't know what they saw. They never even thought Bigfoot, because they thought even if they knew anything about Bigfoot, it was just a TV thing, or it was California. It was not here. So they're trying to process something. They have no idea what's existing. And a lot of folks that I've got to know have said, well, it was really the internet that changed kind of my perception. Now, there is a danger in that, because that maybe they add on certain details they may have read in other reports. But I think for a lot of folks, it did bring them to a point where they say, well, I'm a little bit more open about talking about what happened, because, you know, I had this incident when I was on a snowmobile, or I was out there, you know, working for the Forest Service, and I had this thing happen. And then suddenly I try to tell people, and they're like, you know, you're just totally nuts, or they just won't accept the story. And that's unfortunate. So if this culture is changing a little bit, it's a little bit more acceptable to talk about it. I don't know. I mean, I'm just speaking from my experience here in the New England area, where there's definitely still a very puritanical sort of attitude. And it's, you know, you don't really talk about this kind of stuff as much. It's changing, but not as much as other parts of the country, or even other parts of North America.
Well, I think we can all only go by what we hear, you know, especially myself, because I don't go in the woods. I don't look for Sasquatch, and I never will. It's just not going to happen. But I will talk to people that have had these experiences. And, you know, we say this a lot. Fear as an antecedent, meaning you were spooked before you saw anything, is a powerful inception. It can make you see things and experience things that aren't actually happening. And Leon, I think that was part of what you were trying to say with the 3 different parts of the brain. And you've got is it the 2 F's or the 3 F's? What is it? Freeze, fight, flight.
Yeah, you got fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And those are activated
flop
already.
Fart you know, before I crap all over the place.
You're in those states already. So, and by the time your motor skills catch up to you, in other words, your thinking cognitive motor skills, where you want to say something about something, that's not going to come out in English. It's going to come out like you're speaking in tongues, because your motor skills aren't available to you, because your primal brain's hijacked the body. It's running through the forest. Away we go. You know.
Yeah, well, it's fear. It's still fear that triggers these things, right?
Catches up to you. So.
What I mean is, it's still fear that triggers these things.
Well, see,
for the most part.
You have to remember too, your brain's a pharmaceutical company, and it just is shooting all sorts of different styles of chemicals through your system, through your neural net pathways. And so you're getting shot in with adrenaline, you're getting shot in with dopamine, you're getting shot in with just a whole bunch of huge, powerful chemicals. So yeah, you got to keep that to consideration. I mean, I've been in enough of those situations that I learned to use them as practicums. I like getting spooked by a porcupine. It trains my body. It might be just a porcupine, thank goodness, but it could be something else. You know, how do you tell when your brain is spooking you compared to when your senses are actually trying to warn you about environment? We've lost the 6th sense of bush rhythm. So you have to practice those things to get it back, unless you get married and you have an argument with your wife, and you're working on the dishes and she's over in the stove, and something comes out of your mouth and both your backs are turned towards each other. You can feel her emotions creep across the room, and you realize you shouldn't have said that. That's the phrase. Cut the air with the knife. That's called emotional transference. We as human beings do it all the time to each other. I suspect animals do that as well. That's that 6th perception that they have in the forest. So I think a lot of people are confusing that as being zapped. I don't buy it to being zapped at all. Or even mind speak. Lots of people have heard their names. They're walking through the bush and all of a sudden they hear your name. You're sleeping at nighttime, all of a sudden you hear your name called. You're whatever. That happens a lot with people. So I'm not saying that that's not happening. I'm saying there's potential for that to be something other than what we're defining on the experience. And we have to be fair about that whole analyzing of that data to make sure we're correct with what we're saying, instead of just priming people who are watching our channel with a narrative. They don't know us from the hole in the wall. That's why I think I appreciate you guys, is you guys are trying to be solid, and that is refreshing.
Well, we just try to dig, you know, because a lot of the things that we hear that are not in keeping with everyday reality we have to eliminate the possibility that it's something else.
Yeah.
If we don't ask those questions, we're not being fair to everyone that's sitting at home asking those questions. So that's why I do that. And I try to be respectful to people's experience, because I believe they've actually absolutely experienced these things, especially when you get multiple people It's hard to dispute that multiple people have seen this same orb or whatever they've seen. Now, when it's a single person, you just kind of have to dig a little bit and kind of drag out of them. Is it possible, hear it out of their own mouth? Could it possibly have been something else? That's all.
Well,
I know Alex does the exact same thing.
Advocate, multiple people seeing one thing or not seeing one thing or experiencing the same thing doesn't mean that it's actually happening, because you can get a visual illusion that happens to groups of people. So that's why a lot of stuff on my channel, I really try to show people how the brain works. So at least you have it. Hey, I think this is what Leon was talking about. How do you snap yourself out when your body's already hijacking? How do you snap yourself out when you're in the middle of a situation? How do you snap yourself out if you're in a room or out in the forest with 4 people and 3 of them are discharging inappropriate emotions that are affecting other people? And you're the calm one. How do you do that? How do you help them come back to a balance so they can perceive what's actually happening going on there? Because those times are pretty crucial. Not talking about Sasquatch, but when you're in a fight, flight, freeze, or faint situation in the bush dealing with an animal, you've got to be automatic with everything. So another guy we have, Drake, he has been attacked point blank with a black bear, sow bear coming right at him in seconds. No time to react or nothing, but his skills are fast enough to actually stop that bear from killing him. So that's kind of, I know we're not trained at this level, and I think it's fair to accept that. But the key part is we can become more trained about how do we help ourselves in the bush. But that's going to be a select kind of people, and certain people will be able to do it. Other people are just doing it for a hobby, and that's fine too. But the idea is, again, having some kind of a new way online where we can either network with a variety of us with our different channels that all have the same standard, which to me is the scientific method, or Merton's norms is what it's called. And we can all use those 5 steps, because those are 5 steps that help us realize what we're looking for if we want to know what it is we're actually looking at in a fair way as analyzing data. I don't know why people wouldn't want to know what's actually happening. And then also having kind of a town hall, round hall meeting where we can actually hash things out with civility. And not everyone can join, unfortunately, certain town halls like that.
Not in this subject. Forget it.
But there's 4 of us here. We're civil.
Right.
Well, yeah. Well, you guys were chosen. You're the chosen ones. That's the truth. But you don't think that multiple people, and even if they're experiencing something that seemingly repeals the laws of physics, but they're all for experiencing the same thing, you don't think that lends a little more credibility possibly to what's going on? Not that what they're seeing is what is actually happening, but that
if I could just chime in on that. I mean, having been just 2019, I saw a UFO with 4 colleagues of mine that I would, when I say UFO, truly by the definition of the word, I'm not saying they're aliens or internet. It could have been government technology we've never seen before. Absolutely.
Green guys weren't waving at you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we got video and audio of when this happened, which, I guess sort of helps corroborate our story that we saw this strange anomalous thing in the sky in Pennsylvania, in an area where there's Bigfoot reports and other weird stuff. And I was primarily interested in the Bigfoot stuff. I wasn't really into the UFO stuff. I'm not really now, I guess sort of reluctantly I am, because I had this experience. It just kind of made me want to see, well, hey, what are other people having happen or whatever. But I think the fact that all 4 of us were researchers and we were there for a reason, and we said, okay, well, let's create an account of what we had seen, at least so we can preserve it as fresh as it happened without waiting a month to write a full report on it, and just being able to have those basic details. I don't know. I think that sort of stuff, if you have people that are,
may I ask you a question?
Something, yeah, absolutely.
So how did you do that?
So we basically all, after this event happened, I mean, we were filming in the moment, and it's amazing because, like you said, in those sorts of moments, people just react. They're either looking or they're not doing this or that. Of course, you have the wrong lens on your camera. Well, we had members in our group that had the foresight to pull out their night vision, pull out their recording devices, and just be able to capture something. But what we did was we sat down afterwards. We kind of talked about what we had seen. Obviously, I feel like that may, in some ways, we were all describing the same sort of thing, but then we immediately would write a full report from each of our perspectives, and that way we could compare it afterwards, see if we're all sort of on the same page, or if, well, hey, he remembered it differently. That's still a part of the record. So you can say, well, if we were all completely off, then you would say, well, we saw something different, maybe. I don't know. I mean, that's just the kind of the way we did it. And that was our process. And then we later submitted the video to a friend of ours who is a video analyst for MUFON, which gets a lot of flack, but very, you trust the guy, you trust the person you send the video to and that sort of stuff. And I make no claims about it. I don't think any of us do. It was just an interesting thing that happened. And I just can't explain what it was conventionally, and no one's been able to explain it conventionally. So I just say UFO truly by the definition of the word, without any associations with that. So
what an airplane.
If it's helpful, I was just reading your body language as you were doing that, and you did experience definitely something.
See,
and the other thing is the other thing that was quite neat was you're totally dead on. That's what I appreciate about you. Now, I've been scoping you online here, right? So you don't even know who I am, Alex. But I always do that. I always stalk people online. That's my gifting.
You did us the same way.
But you were correct. The only I wouldn't say it was a mistake, because I actually believe what you just said to me, that you guys did experience something. You did have an experience. It was something and you were fair about the way you described it, which was, I'm saying it literally as the term, what it means for UFO, which is, I don't really know what we saw, but we did see something. Yeah. Plus, the amount of time you saw it is a very important factor too. Mm-hmm. You were totally correct. The correct way of doing that, if you're doing it with witnesses, is separate the witnesses and let them write down their events first. Because it's not just you guys talking when you're sharing what you think happened. It's also what the other person's feeling you say. It's kind of like when a kid, if you say to a little kid, are you a good little boy or a bad little boy? Kid doesn't know what a good little boy or bad little boy is. He's only 3, but he can sense there's one that's good and one that's bad. And that's called leading the witness, right? Emotional leading the witness. So I buy everything that you say, that you guys definitely had something that was kind of out there and the little like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's like, what is this? We didn't really know. You don't ask for this kind of stuff to happen. It just sort of does. And what was so funny about that was, that's an area where people report this sort of stuff. And like I said, I was much more interested in the Sasquatch part of it. I mean, there was a family there that was saying 3 generations were having activity. I mean, it was a really interesting story. I have the interview with them up on my channel, just really fascinating. But you're talking to people in town, they just sort of say, oh, that sort of stuff isn't that weird. I mean, that stuff just kind of happens here. Very funny. It's like how nonchalant people are about this sort of stuff in areas where, I don't know, maybe there's other activity going on, or they're just used to it. They've grown up with that sort of stuff, which I think is really, really interesting.
If they're using that phraseology, it's usually a town cultural imprint. In other words, the town's aware of the activity. That's why they're saying it that way, because if they actually had an experience of that activity, they'd be wording it totally different. As a matter of fact, they'd be yakking yak to you because you had an experience as well, right? So, and that's another factor that can kind of be in when you're data collecting or experiencing anything that's kind of strange and bizarre. But
well, I'll tell you what, we're going to take one more question, and this one's going to take a little while, so that's why I say one more. But before we do, I want to remind everyone again to make sure you go and subscribe to Bigfoot Okanagan. That's Leon's channel, and you can actually
OKONOGON.
Oh, I forgot. I put an O instead of an A. I'm sorry.
No. It's actually the other way around. I was just testing to see if you remembered. It's actually all A's except for the first one.
Yeah, no, I'll put an O in there instead of an A in the middle.
That's on YouTube. Okanagan.
Okanagan.
That's what I put. And make sure you go and subscribe to Sasquatch Out of the Shadows. I've been misspelling things all day, so I give myself a pass today. Monday night, 8:00 Eastern. Alex has his podcast. Very good guest. Had a great guest on last Monday. Make sure you go and check that out. Make sure you go and subscribe. Anybody that wants the picture, just be patient with me because there's 462 people watching right now, just in live chat of the Bigfoot with his member hanging out. You're gonna have to zoom in to see it, but it's there.
That sounds a little weird, doesn't it, you guys? Do you feel a little weird out about that? You zoom into it, yeah.
Well, this thing is standing 60 or 70 yards away out from behind a tree, and I'm gonna send it to you guys too, so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And if you want to come on the show, if you've had an experience, oh, I'm sorry, what's that, Brad?
I was just gonna say Sammy Hagar had an album like that, and I think it was called Standing Hampton.
Okay. Sammy Hagar.
I just diverged.
You do. That's why we love you. If you had an experience, you want to come on the show, if you're a researcher, you don't have to show your face. You don't have to say your name. You can just come on and give your experience, because a lot of people I talk to are just not ready to tell everyone their experience and have them look at them. So that is an option. If you want to come on, tell your experience, email me right here, bigfootodyssey@gmail.com. And like I said, be patient about the picture, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to see it. All right, here we go. Last question. Why haven't there been any totally clear videos of an entire Sasquatch since the Patterson video? Leon, we'll begin with you.
Why do you always go to me first? How about I get a
Okay.
chance?
Alex, we'll go to Alex first. Alex.
Sure. That's a really interesting question. I often think about that, and I look into other subjects as well. I mean, if we're talking about Champ or some of this other stuff, there seems to be a period where there was great videos, great evidence of supposed creatures out there, and since then there hasn't been a whole lot, which really kind of makes you wonder, is it, I mean, supposedly our technology's gotten better, but at the same time, if you see, as Leon talked about earlier, a bear running across the road and, oh, let me grab my phone, by the time it's ready, it's already gone. You can't get it, or you'll get the butt and it'll be all blurry and everything. I don't know if that maybe has something to do with it. I think this may be going out there on a bit of a limb, but as our technology has gotten better, I mean, there's all these frequencies, all this sort of stuff going on, and maybe we can feel part of that. Maybe other animals can sense it. I mean, if we're talking about just environmental changes, everyone's carrying a cell phone around now. There's this stuff going out. Maybe it's something to be avoided. I don't know. This is completely, like I said, just very out there. Maybe the fact that everyone's carrying a cell phone around their pockets, maybe that's why we can't get a clear video, or people just suck at taking videos and photos, and maybe people should learn how to properly do that right away, because the blob squatch thing is a real phenomenon. It's not just in the Bigfoot subject, it's in a lot of things. Even if you look at UFOs and that sort of stuff, there seems to be clearer evidence or videos and pictures from way back in the day as compared to today, where, like just this last week, there was this incident in New Jersey where people were stopping on the side of the highway and were taking pictures of this UFO that turned out to be a blimp with the light on the bottom. I mean, that in normal circumstances, you'd probably say, well, that's not a UFO. But of course, that broke the internet, and the story was going all over the place. But it just goes to show, just because everyone has a phone and this smart technology, supposedly, that we still can't get quality photos of a lot of animals, let alone maybe something as a Sasquatch. I really don't know. I mean, I don't really have a good answer for that.
Fair enough. Leon, what do you think?
I think it's because, imagine if we could go back into the 1800s, or even say 1850s, say, and the West was starting to get really investigated and all that kind of stuff. Animals were much bigger in those days as well, which is interesting in size and stuff, because we wiped a lot of the larger ones out when we first got it here on the continent. And but we had the technology that we have today. And it was readily available to all those people who are used to being in the bush and in forestry. We would have them already on tape. And I think that's the key part, is the more we're moving to a technological rhythm of society, the least we have, the more inavailability we'll have a chance to actually go and find these guys. And I think that's why I thought the percentage was 80% were found along roadsides, or spotted along roadsides. That's the same stat for beer, at least in Canada, for deer.
Molson.
Yeah. Or kokanee, because that's a Sasquatch beer here up here in BC. But all sightings for most animals, bear, deer, all that stuff is on roadsides usually, or out in a field as you're driving by, right? So is there a correlation between that? I don't know. I think the bottom line is that on one of my channels, or one of my videos I put called the Coyote Loon Challenge. And I was offering $50 Canadian, which is $37.60 American, I think. I said, I want you to go and see, just go try to film a bloody coyote hollering. Film a loon actually calling. You know, it's not easy to do, especially if you're out, because patience. technology stops us from having patience. Our brain neural pathways are getting very quickly turned up, which is making us not be able to reflect. We're too busy our brain's going so fast, it's thinking chronically. This is what's keeping you up at nighttime, is you can't shut your brain off, is the way our technology is influencing our thinking process.
Instant gratification too. If you think about with social media and everything, it's just our brains are being rerouted. Yeah.
This thing right here. And there's a great, the Social Media Dilemma on Netflix right now. Check that one out. If you want to see this, that thing there is the #1 addiction that's already hit here. It's going to get a lot more worse. And the more we separate from being part of nature, the less responsibility we have for nature. Now, that's a cultural imprint we're getting in the West here, at least in North America. I can't speak for Europe because a lot of their forests aren't like ours. We actually have wild forest here that you be careful in. You know, they're not going to run into a cougar or a bear in their forests, as Andy McGrath would attest to you. So, I mean, we're used to, if you're in the bush. I mean, when I worked in forestry, we had 11 people die in the 11 years I was working in forestry, and they weren't pretty times. And so, you know, but the idea about why we can't get them on film, it's coming. I think the technology is coming, especially when these drones get down to those small pocket drones where you can get 20 of them. You can grid them out in an area. They can grid an area out really, really fast for technology. And we like to do a lot of gridding in areas when we get reports to come in. So it's a kilometer by kilometer. So if there's any tracks in that area, we will find them. If there's any kind of markers or anything, we're going to find that evidence. So, but you also have to be skilled in honestly understanding what is. I don't buy structures or from Sasquatch. Just like I mentioned, go on your Google search and type in bush survival structures, and then type in Sasquatch structures, and look through the 500,000 pictures of both of them, and you'll say there's some familiarity to them. They look and they have the custom of man-made, not something that's from the forest. It would look architecturally different, in my opinion, as I shared before. So how do you read grounds? How do you read tracks? Why do tracks all of a sudden disappear? That used to be a big mystery, you know, but you get that with deer track and everything else. So it's not a big mystery if you understand how to track things. But there's all these other fronts that we would have to do as researchers. And I think the key part is to get teams, but highly trained teams to help out. And I don't think we're there yet. We're getting closer to being there, especially with the younger generation that's out there.
Agreed.
They like that stuff. So,
Brad, what do you think?
I agree with Leon and Alex. You know, I don't know. It's so subjective. I just don't know. I mean, you know, as I said,
Fair enough. You know, if you
yeah,
can't
I mean,
think of anything, I have my idea of why.
Yeah.
I've got, look, what are the variables here? Okay. Patterson and Gimlin, there were 13 days in the bush. They were on horseback. I think that's major, huge deal. They were using celluloid, not digital. Digital is not good, especially when you don't know how to use your equipment. When it comes to digital, if you don't have the right frame rate, you don't have the right bit rate, any kind of movement, you know, you can't zoom in on anything because it becomes pixelated. That's where we get a lot of the pareidolia now, is people taking one square frame of the bushes, zooming in on it, and here's this face that everybody can see that it's a face, but there's an eye over here and an eye down here and a mouse over here and the nose down. You know, there's no symmetry to it at all. So the obvious pareidolia stuff, you know, those things. But I think just stabilization, and there's no one out there. We're getting worse at this, at going into the woods and staying there for a long time.
Yep.
No one's going after them. Like I said, most people that do this, the weekend warriors, the researcher, they're looking for evidence, footprints, tree structures. That's most of what you're going to see from a lot of Bigfoot channels that actually go in the woods. They're not looking for the creature, staying overnight a lot. Maybe they'll do it 3 or 4 times a year. Certain people will, absolutely. But for a long period of time, someone out there trying to get closer to them, and when they hear it, going after it, it's just not happening. So, and even then, you're going to have the equipment, the thermal drone, the whatever. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's a logistical nightmare, I think, just for what we were doing, to put together what we are going to do is a logistical nightmare, and we're only doing it for a week. I think it's going to take a lot longer than that to really get something solid where it's not going to prove anything. What's it going to prove? Nothing. But it can be convincing enough for more people to say, hey, yeah, okay, there's something out there.
What kind of boggles me too is imagine these guys. Imagine the Patty tape. How long was it before they got involved with Sasquatch and they went out into the bush to go film it? You guys know?
They were filming a movie. They were filming a Bigfoot movie. That's why you never saw a Bigfoot movie, because they actually got one. If they made a movie, it was going to completely undercut Patty.
Because I just thought, here you go, you got these guys, and they're good old boys, and they got their horses, and they're going, and for them to catch that, and look at how many people, and this is why I go, we're missing something, obviously, in the online
horseback. That's what I think.
Well, I think
to go on horseback
is a big thing. Like when I was talking to Justin when he was going in here, I think he's in there in the bush right now doing that his documentary movie right now, filming. And I said, you want me to get you in there with a helicopter, or you want to get quads, or what is it you want to use there and stuff? And he says, no, I don't. And I was surprised. He said, no, I don't want to go in unnatural. And I thought, good. That's exactly right. Don't go in unnatural. And he's, I hound him a little bit to make sure you got safety stuff and like you can get out to us. So if
he's going by himself, that's ridiculous.
So
he's going by himself.
He has all that stuff, but sorry, go ahead.
What do you think about that? He's going by himself. Is that crazy? I
don't think so. Nick would be out there with him, and I have Nick as backup if he gets into trouble. I'll send Nick in there or whatever. I know where he's at. So, and that's what you're needing to do. I think you have. I don't think you have to worry about them if they're what I believe they are to be. I don't think they're. I think if you're a bit of a jerk, like any animal, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
I think if you are respectful, I think they'll probably give you the space you might need. And if they're curious, if they're more primal, like we talked about, the idea is, do they have a higher state of conscious availability? That's important. That means if they have a capacity to recognize themselves, that means they have a conscious availability. I know me from knowing all the other things I'm looking at. Can they hold their breath underwater? Well, they apparently can, because up here, just over in Kamloops area, there was some fishermen or duck hunters where one came into the water and they thought it was a dog or something swimming towards where their duck decoys were. Anyway, went under the water and came up. Now, why is that significant? Well, because if you have language, you have to be able to learn. You have to be able to have the capacity. The part of your brain has to be developed so that you can control your breathing. Yeah, so that tells us that give us an idea of what's happening, what style of brain development they have by having that capacity. Those are the kind of questions I'm interested in, because I think that's what's going to help us track them down instead of the projection onto, I don't understand stuff, so I come up with this theory. Reality. The idea is my idea is more important than what the topic is. Well, the topic is, how do we find a Sasquatch? Not your idea about you're coming up with that's not helping us find a Sasquatch, even though you're defending it tooth and nail. So,
well, I think there are plenty of people that can get close. I say within 200 or 300 yards of the area where they know that there's a group or a family group. I think it's going to be the homestead where they've had these creatures coming in at a specific time. Every year they come in November, December. I think that's going to be a prime little setup there to catch. All you're going to catch is decent evidence. You're not going to learn anything more about behavior, I don't think, without direct observation. And you're talking about a creature that's apparently sentient, emotionally intelligent, are not going to let you watch them do their regular day-to-day life. It's just not
right. Well, I think that's a little bit of the danger too, is having let's say it's one of these habituations or homesteads, like you said, where these people, maybe they're not trained how to use their equipment properly, or they're just simply not researchers. This is just a part of life. So maybe they'll get that picture, like you said, that's great. That'll be interesting. Obviously, pictures are scrutinized heavily, as video is, because you can really fake anything these days. But at the same time, I mean, it's just something that you can kind of look at and be like, well, this is cool, but how does this further the subject? Which, it's that's where, when we talked about earlier, even with putting a team together, or if you had the available funds, I mean, if only there was like a Tom Slick out there willing to just dish out money and get these people on board, or get people on board to do it, that's a different setup. I mean, like I even said earlier with Diane Fossey and some of these sort of situations, these people just didn't just waltz into the jungle and see gorillas. It took them a long time to do that. And that's the approach that other researchers now, when they're dealing with these species, orangutans, gorillas, whatever, it's the same sort of thing. They have to keep, they're doing that approach that's been proven to work. Has everyone really tried this approach from a research standpoint? Maybe in some aspects. I mean, you've got a couple groups or projects that have tried that in the past, but habituations and these home areas seem to be where there's the most kind of consistent stuff going on, if we are to believe the premise that a lot of these are legitimate encounters. And I'm sure we can all think of ones that we would consider that they are legitimate.
That's why we think the story is important. You got to have the narrative, just because of the subjects matter, and because of digital and how easy it is to fake things. Yeah. And that's why we did Bigfoot Odyssey. That's why we traveled and told people's story. If you haven't seen our 12 documentaries, go to this channel and go to playlists, and you'll see, I think there's 11 of them in there, but the last one is Sisters of the Moon. I haven't put it in there yet, or Daniela hasn't put it in there yet. She's
pass the buck, Kerry.
She's slacking on me. I'm gonna. But hey, it's been a fantastic show. Definitely appreciate you gentlemen joining us here tonight. Alex, you guys make sure you go and subscribe to Sasquatch Out of the Shadows. Make sure you catch Alex's podcast on YouTube Mondays at 8:00 p.m. Eastern. Bigfoot, Okanagan. I just like to mess with you a little bit every now and then. I know. How many times have I done that? I do that to you every time. Make sure you go and subscribe to Bigfoot, Okanagan with an O. That's Leon's channel. Some excellent information on there. Some good videos, guys. Make sure you go and subscribe to those. Subscribe to Hidden Existence, Daniela's channel. She does our researchers reports on off days on Saturdays. We have the researchers report here Wednesday. Not sure who we're having on, but we're still having it 7:00 p.m. Central. Next Sunday, the 27th, is Mike Patterson. Mike Flower. Ontario Sasquatch is going to be here with us at 8:00 p.m. Central. Ryan Rush is also going to be here with Brad and I for that. And this Friday is going to be our next late show, and that's going to be our sit-in format. And we'll see you guys then. So have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Gary.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.